What your building sits on is going to be absolutely critical to the success of your building, whether it's a full basement, like the slab that's getting poured here, or if your building is sitting on something more temporary. Underneath whatever your building is sitting on, though, is the most important piece you need to consider, which is your soil substrate. Are you on sand? Are you on clay that's going to heave? Or are you straight on rock? And what does that do? Wood that's sitting on the ground is just going to rot or get termites. Foundations that are poorly executed, even temporary ones, are going to cause major failure problems in your building. We chose to foot the studio on concrete piers that are down footed on rock, and we'll show you more about that later. But there's nothing wrong with having sheds on blocks. One of the problems being if your blocks get eroded out or eaten by, say in this case, a big flood event, you're going to potentially want to move your shed to somewhere more permanent, which is doable if your shed is built to actually roll or be moved. One common way to foot a building is to actually pour a footer, this wide concrete that's at the bottom underneath this form for a stem wall that's going to be poured, that the walls will sit on for this garage. The footer is below frost line and the stem wall holds the building and keeps wood from ever coming in contact with the dirt. For our house, we chose to do a unified concrete slab with thickened edge walls. So those are 2-foot edges, and then the whole slab is 6 inches deep. One of the things about a shallow insulated slab is you actually have to insulate around the perimeter and insulate under the slab to prevent frost heave. For something like the slab for our solar shed, where we didn't care if the concrete cracked slightly aesthetically, we just poured 4 inches with no insulation underneath, cheap and fast. A word on permanent foundations and working with concrete. It is exhausting work. No joke. You are working with liquid stone, and concrete sets up by a chemical reaction that can cause serious burns if you leave your skin unprotected and spend too much time with skin in concrete. Concrete is also one of those jobs where you can never, ever have too many hands on site for a big concrete pour, and you can never, ever have too many hands that know what they're doing. And most of us who have done big concrete pours for the first time underestimate the amount of bracing, support, blocking, and structural we will need to hold liquid concrete in place until it sets up and becomes the concrete you know and love that is durable, hard, and doesn't actually cause blowouts, liquid spills, and any sort of disaster on your project. In addition, there is a lot of prep work that needs to be done before you pour your slab that is very, very specific and very, very important. So there's a lot of resources out there for learning how to do major concrete work in foundations, but I also highly recommend working with an expert for your first time, because once it is set in concrete, it is literally all your mistakes set in stone. And whatever you forgot to put underneath the building as far as utilities, or didn't put in the building as far as these seismic ties and bolts or corners for your rebar, are going to be permanent and may affect how your building's structure and function happens. So this is a really big area of expertise, and hiring an expert will be well worth your money and learning. So a little background on where we're putting the studio. Most of our soil here is crushed sandstone, which means it's very well drained. There's very little clay in it, so it's not going to heave. Otherwise, we'd consider digging out some of this soil and replacing it with crushed gravel. And we wanted to keep this building mobile, or the potential for it to be mobile. So we're actually building 6 blocks, concrete blocks, that we are going to go all the way down to the base rock, which for us right where we're located is between 3.5 and 4 feet down. And once we dig those out, I'm digging them with post hole diggers here so that I don't have to use a ton of concrete to essentially create concrete piers that'll be footed on rock. And then Margot has built the little wood boxes you'll see us filling in another video. And those are actually going to be the concrete blocks that our skids on the other side of our studio structure sit on. If I were placing a shed on blocks, I would just go ahead and dig down and give it a big gravel base. And then I would haul in my commercially made concrete blocks and essentially do the same thing I'm going to do here. We have to make sure that our concrete blocks are all level with each other and that they're all going to be square with each other. So that doesn't mean just for our purposes, it's a 20-foot building and it's 10 feet wide. That's great. We can measure 20 feet along and 10 feet across, but we also have to make sure that's square. And then the next video, I'll try and show you a little bit on how we make sure that our base for our building is square. By the way, it's painful to watch hand digging when there's a backhoe in the background, but sometimes good old manual labor and a small post hole is exactly the way to do it. Okay, so if we're looking at our building location to get an accurate idea of where we might be locating this thing, we need to actually check our diagonals so that we know our building's square. And we'll go into diagonals more, but right here we're going to show you, I've calculated with my handy dandy construction calculator, or that geometry class you hated in high school where they made you do the a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and then you take the square root. That's what we're doing right here to find out that our building stakes are square. So we're coming out, I know my building needs to be 20 feet long. That's what we're shooting for. So I come out to 20 feet on my red Milwaukee tape. And then I know I need 22 feet, 4 inches and 5/16, but I hooked the tape. So I now had to add, because that tape's in a loop, my extra math there. And then I'm coming out to 20 feet, and where my tape, I keep moving this until my tape crosses exactly where my diagonal is supposed to be, and that'll give me a chance to pin my corners square and see what this building location might look like, which in this case is right about, there we go. There. And I'm going to the inside of my tape, in this case inside of tape to inside of tape, which we'll double check when we actually go to build the building, but for rough pinning this looks pretty good. Right there. Okay, so now at this point we've checked our diagonal on this side. We'll double check our width here, but we have an idea of what the building might look like if we stuck it here. So this is a perimeter check for, do we want to put the building here? Guess what? We did want to put the building there. So then we ran these yellow string lines out to stakes so that we could run a grid and put our boxes in place and then double check our diagonals and our width again with the concrete blocks we are about to pour. Remember, there's a post hole sized hole going down in the middle of every one of those blocks that's footed to rock. In addition, we've got the septic line coming up. It's just temporarily in place. And we have the water line stubbed up where it's going to enter the building. So our utilities are in place. And then Margot goes around and she's very carefully checking level on every one of these blocks. Remember, if you own a short level, to find a very straight border, a very straight piece of metal and put your level on that. In addition, builder's levels, which are available for rental at most rental centers, are really great ways to double check that all of your permanent marks for your foundation, whatever that be, or all of your blocks are actually truly level. And when you rent it from a rental center, they'll teach you how to use your builder's level. For us, then we went to mixing our concrete. You can do this in a small concrete mixer. If it's a bigger pour, you're going to have cement trucks. For us, it was better in the wheelbarrow, and we actually ended up making our own concrete mix because we had most of the components, but buying something like high-strength concrete mix is a great way to do this. Or if you're putting your shed on blocks, you're just going to be buying the blocks commercially, and then hopefully making sure they have a good gravel footing and are where you want them. And if they heave, you might just be re-leveling your building every so often. Our studio is built to be complete and just sit on top of the concrete piers. But if you're counting on your concrete or your foundation as part of the structures you're building, you're going to need to attach it permanently, firmly, and really well. So in this case, for this greenhouse, I'm actually drilling out into the concrete using a hammer drill, and I'll be attaching it using Tapcon anchors. I've done this after the concrete is set so I can attach my anchors wherever I need to. The other alternative to this is to actually wet set or put your J-bolts, which really do look like J's, and the specificity of how many J-bolts you need, what size, where you need to put them, or whether or not you need seismic ties in addition will be dictated by your building department and your local building codes. For us on our house build, we added a lot of them, but we added them based on the codes that we had used in Nevada since we didn't have any building codes to work with where we lived. Which brings me to my very important reminder. Remember, you probably live in a place with a building department, which means you need to find out what the requirements are for temporary and permanent buildings as far as foundations goes. There might be a limit on the size of building you can put on a temporary foundation. In fact, there probably is. There might be very specific requirements for how you're doing your permanent foundation, and you may or may not be able to reach those by yourself without hiring an expert. So again, when you're in this building process, before you set things in concrete, make sure you know exactly what will be required of you and what will be inspected, and also what you probably should do for the landscape that you're building in. In our case, one of the very specific things we went after when we were doing the studio is we knew that because we were putting it on blocks and it wouldn't be sealed to the concrete like this greenhouse is, we were going to want to keep rodents and critters out from the underneath. So we went ahead and added metal all around the base of our building to close up that space that's between the blocks and the skids and then the rest of the building, so no critters can get underneath. Start it.